How do video-optimized servers differ from transactional servers?
One of the things that we really need to do to be able to understand the differences is really to look at the data which are coming, the structure of the data. Transactional servers is really built for small randomized data. And this is typically generated from emails, database lookups, and other small transactions. We will see that data is counted in bytes, and that especially the operating system and the storage needs to have very high seek rates. So very often we will find that in transactional servers you have a lot of SSDs because this is very fast for seeking. And that also means that you will have a lot of IOs. So in a transactional server, it's making completely sense to talk about high IOs, where in a video server, we're talking about really low IOs, which I'll cover in a minute. The other thing is that the data transfer, the amount of data we are transferring at a given time, is actually quite limited in a transactional server compared to a video server. Now let's try to look at video data, how that actually looks. And as we can see from this diagram, basically video data comes in big blocks. And those blocks comes in sequential order. And on top of that, they are also either 64K or even up to 128K blocks. And therefore, because they are sequential, the data rate or the data transfer is also very high. Now, that gives us some challenging when it comes to writes. And you know a little bit about that, Dave, don't you?
Absolutely. From a storage perspective, that's exactly what we see. In the surveillance world, it's a write-intensive environment, and large sequential sustained writes are what you see. We develop storage that's optimized for that. Those writes tend to be measured instead of in IOPS, they tend to be measured in megabytes per second or even terabytes per second. And that's exactly what we see in that market.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
Well, the other thing is also that if we look at generic servers, or transactional servers, they are really built for very small updates and then a lot of seeking, or meaning reading. When we look at video data in a surveillance environment, then actually we're having an 80-20 rules, and that means that 80% of the data transfer is writing, and only 20% is playback or reading again. So that, of course, again makes a difference, right? Now, the other thing we need to look at is basically the amount of transfer, which we talked about before. We are looking at data transfers in megabytes or even in terabytes, right? And therefore, the I/O is going to be really few compared to, again, the transactional server, which has I/Os counted in thousands, right? The other thing we need to look at is network ports. Network ports need to be optimized for video. The storage controllers especially, because we talked about that 80% was writing. So we really need to be able to have something which an I/O controller which really can handle huge amount of data transfer and get that, of course, to the disks. And therefore, we will, for Fibrenetix point of view, we really like to have as many spindles as possible, so we can really spread all the data over the spindles and write in parallel. The interesting thing with a video server is also that very often the CPUs can be a lot less powerful. So you will save a little bit of money on that. And the reason for that is that the CPU is only really used for the OS and for the installed application. There could be the VMSs or whatever, right? And if you want to have VMSs with video analytics in it, like Axxonsoft do, then you basically put a specialized component into it, and therefore you have a GPU or which can take over the load from the CPU. So the normal processor does not need to be 24 cores or all kind of very high expensive stuff, right? And that basically is some of the key elements which are different.